I'm just going to say good morning, everyone. Welcome to Taking Public History Online, which is our workshop for this morning. My name's Michael Eads, and I'm the Public Engagement Manager and also a Research Fellow here in the School of Advanced Study. And I'm going to confess from the outset that I'm not actually a historian, but I do work a lot in public engagement. Particularly by running the Being Human Festival of the Humanities, which some of you might have heard about. So today's session really is all about how we do really good quality, interactive, two-way public engagement. I guess really when we can't meet up with people in person and we're doing stuff digitally and doing it online. I think it's a really important discussion to be having at this point, because obviously we've kind of got used to doing things online, or many of us have over the past year or so, because we've had to. But we are getting towards a point now where things are going to be starting to open up again. And it's going to be interesting to see which bits of online activity continue and which ones we want to maintain. And which we, want to kind of set aside again as it becomes possible to do other things. So that's what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to be chairing, and really the main kind of leaders of the session are going to be Amy and Liam from Dig Yourself, which is a brand new agency and consultancy firm specialising in public engagement and heritage and digital engagement particularly. I've worked with both Amy and Liam quite a lot, as some of you may have done, on projects like Layers of London, which is really, really exciting and inspiring digital mapping project, but which also involved a lot of grassroots work with communities as well. So housekeeping stuff, I've already said, if you could keep yourselves muted, unless you're wanting to ask a question or something, that'd be very helpful. It just prevents the background noise. There will be points where there's questions asked to the room, and there will be kind of Q&As and stuff. So it'll be made clear if there's an opportunity to unmute yourselves and speak. It is quite nice to see people, so keep your cameras on if you're happy to do that, but if you'd rather have it off, that's also fine. And just be aware that we are recording this session so that people can watch it afterwards. So, be mindful of that if you want to ask a question. If you want to ask a question but don't want to be recorded, then use the chat function. And finally, I think the thing to say is it is helpful if you do speak to the room, if you self-describe for the benefit of people who may have visual impairments. So I'm going to try to self-describe myself very briefly. You don't have to go into a lot of detail, but just to say I'm a man with a beard in my very late 30s. So yeah, I think that's everything in terms of housekeeping. So I think I'm just going to hand straight over to Amy and Liam to start the session.
Thanks, Michael. So my name's Amy. I'm a white woman. I've got blonde hair, and I'm sat with a bookshelf and a curtain behind me. And today we're going to be talking about taking public history online. Before we introduce ourselves and then learn a little bit about all of you that are here today, I'm just going to run through what we're aiming to cover. So you'll be with us until 1 o'clock, but don't worry, there's going to be a break. We're aiming for a break at 12 o'clock where you've got 5 minutes to get a cup of tea, but Liam and I will stay on the call. So if you've got any questions, you can speak to us then. And we're aiming for about 20 minutes, 15 minutes at the end where you can ask questions too. So hopefully if there's anything you want more information on, we can help you with that. So what we're going to cover is public history, what that looks like when you deliver it online. And obviously we've been doing this for over a year, as you probably all have at this point, in some way delivering some kind of aspects of public history not in person. And so what are the advantages? What are the opportunities? What do we want to take into the future, as Michael said, as we start to kind of transition into normal life again? And then we're going to look at some case studies of best practice, and we're going to hear from some people from different organisations that have done some really amazing things in the last year. So you can hear from them about what worked, and you can see, you know, oh, we have a similar resource, or we have a similar skill set. And, you know, we try to pick a range of different organisations, because we're aware that there's so many different people here today that have big sites and small sites, and big budgets and small budgets, and all sorts of things like that. Liam's going to be very much focusing on audiences and building audiences and online engagement. And then we're going to end with some tips and tricks for online tools that you can use, free programs and things like that, to hopefully make your life a bit easier. So I'm going to introduce ourselves. So it would be really good, whilst I introduce myself and Liam introduces himself, if you can introduce yourselves in the chat. So that is the chat function. You'll probably see some messages here. And if you could just put a bit about maybe what organisation you're coming from, or what work you're doing, if you're linked to something like that, or what you're hoping to maybe do after this session. So that would be really good. If you don't mind just popping some introductions into the chat, and whilst I do that, I will introduce myself and Liam. So we are Dig Yourself, and we started in the pandemic, as Michael said. Before that, Liam and I have worked on various kind of public engagement projects, and we met on the Layers of London project, which was a project delivered by the Institute of Historical Research. Then we went on to do other things, and then in the pandemic we both were doing a lot of online engagement, various different areas and communities and histories, and really enjoyed it, and realised that we'd kind of built up a wealth of knowledge in this kind of area. And so because of that, we have then gone on to create this agency where we can offer services, training, and advice and support for heritage organisations that are delivering public history. I used to be a teacher, so my background is very much in anything to do with in-person learning, communities, and things like that. And I've managed 3 NLHF kind of engagement projects at this point. Liam, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yep, sure. I'm Liam Cunningham, and yeah, my background is kind of in human rights. So I worked in lots of charities and NGOs before, but then I got a job with Layers of London kind of by accident, and I really enjoyed it. I loved working in heritage and making history more available to everyone. So I wanted to continue that kind of work. So I wanted to join up with Amy to do this, Dig Yourself, and helping other organizations far and wide engage with the public. And I specialize in kind of communications and online engagement. So, and I'll be talking to you a bit about using social media and different online platforms for communication a bit later on today.
It's really nice to hear from what you're doing. Catherine, I'm from the Isle of Axholme, so I'm absolutely fascinated by that project that you're doing at the University of Nottingham. So that is it's really great to hear the kind of wide range of people today, and we've definitely programmed for that. So we hope that there'll be something there that we cover today that's going to be relevant and might spark some ideas, inspiration, or answer some questions that you've had recently. I'm going to kind of start by covering this kind of field of public history, just kind of recapping what that is, because you probably all in some way deliver aspects of public history and work within that field, but you might not have realised that there's a kind of bigger framework that you're working in. And then answering the kind of question of what that looks like when you take it into a digital setting. So public history, the way I kind of think about it, although there's many different definitions for this, is it's history for the public and it's history by the public. So you've got 2 images on the screen here. So the first image at the top is a picture of Jayaben Desai, who was a South Asian working class woman who led the Grunwick strikes in the 1970s. Now, this is a history, and the Jabin size of our, British history have been left out a lot of the time. But then there's been so much amazing work the past, say, 40 years to kind of right those wrongs and, rewrite these histories back in. And that's, I suppose, one of the main kind of aims of public history today. And you'll have seen that recently, especially this past year, with looking at further kind of like how we name our streets and things like that. So it's history out of these kind of traditional frameworks. Now, if you were to write a book about Jabin Desai, I would say that's still an example of a public history project, because it's tackling a kind of story that's maybe been left out in the past, but it's still a kind of traditional way of disseminating historical information, a book. The other way of kind of working within public history is to kind of do that within a different structure. So it might be like this women workers project, women in industry at St Ives Archives, which is quite hard to say. They decided that they would do some research and try and find out the stories of these women workers, but do that by using the local community. So they've got community members that are researching and helping to build that project up and preserve those memories and histories. So you can see, you can kind of have public history, the topic of public history and the structure, and sometimes both. And I think for Liam and I, we really like that aspect, because it means that people become public history makers. They can be involved in the historical process, they can do research, and they can share, and they can help preserve archives and objects and share them with other people. So it kind of offers the opportunity to kind of democratize history a little bit. So some of you have already done this in the chat, which is wonderful. But if you haven't, it'd be really great to hear from you in the chat if there's public history projects you're working on at the moment. Maybe you've delivered something already, or maybe you're working on a project, and it'd be really good to hear more about that. Maybe it's an online exhibition. Maybe you're running a series of online talks. So in the next couple of minutes, if you wouldn't mind maybe popping some of those projects that you're working on in the chat, and we can kind of see the breadth of what people are working on.
And if people want to include links, that would be really good as well.
I'm just reading through some of your introductions, because I know that a lot of you already kind of covered this. So I can see at London Fire Brigade Museum, all your collections and engagement is online. I think probably a lot of people here are going to be in the same boat as you. And I can see lots of kind of creative ones, kind of using, art and stories and things like that, which is really nice. And public lectures, which have been really popular. I definitely have attended things that I probably wouldn't have gone to in person online. I think in some ways it's been accessible. In some ways there's, I think, other kind of barriers there.
I like Esther Wilson says she's doing MA research that looks at the Crown and Netflix and the role of social digital media. So
that sounds fascinating. That's great.
The Crown is like, I suppose, a public history project on a grand scale, but obviously needs to be examined to see how it represents the history that we all are sort of familiar with.
Yeah, that's a really good example of a kind of really great public history topic. Great. So I can see seminar series, lots of exhibitions and online databases. So kind of like making stories and histories and objects accessible to an online audience, which I think that probably for a lot of people here is something that they were working on doing anyway, and it kind of catalyzed having to do that a lot quicker because of the pandemic. Great. So it's really great to see kind of what you're working on. Podcasters, a lovely one, Sam. So I'm going to kind of run through now some examples I think that we've seen during this past year that I think are really good examples of great public history engagement, and ways that people have moved from their in-person offline engagement and translated that to an online audience quite well. And they might kind of meet some of your needs, and it might kind of frame some of your thinking about what you can deliver in the future in a different way. So Manchester Museum have done a really great programme here. It was called To Have and to Heal, and it was based around their collection of ancient Egyptian artifacts. And what they did is, obviously, you know, as a museum, you're going to have people that are in a kind of curator role that have all this amazing information. You've still got the collections, you just can't have people accessing the building. So they came up with a really innovative way to kind of solve this problem, and that was by running a free community education program. What this meant was that members of the public could come, and every week they would meet with the curator. So they're getting a kind of really personal experience. They're accessing the collections in a way that maybe they wouldn't have been able to do in person, because you can focus on specific objects and you can kind of get up close in a way you wouldn't be able to do in person. The curator can then share all their research and stories. And it means that you then kind of are raising the skill level of your audience. They're more invested in the museum and your collection. They want to come back in the future. And so I thought that was a really great way of kind of using the skill set and the resources you already have. Now we're going to go a bit more into the kind of tools and ways that you would be able to deliver this. And I'm not quite sure how they actually delivered it, but it would be easily be able to do via Zoom in a similar kind of setting to this, you know, where you meet up once a week on a Tuesday at 6 o'clock and you do an hour of this kind of learning together. And those kind of community learning programs we've seen quite a lot of, and I've delivered one recently, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that later. Next up, we have Mrs. Smith's Cottage, which is in Lincoln, not far from the Isle of Axholme, actually. So this one is a really lovely example of if you're a small organisation and you know, you are maybe mainly volunteer run, some of this kind of examples of digital engagement can seem very grand and maybe a bit out of reach, and maybe you know, might have some kind of skill sets that you don't have within your team. And I think this is a really good example of something that is quite achievable. So first off, they have a very fancy 3D tour, which is not achievable for everyone, but there are ways that you can do that easily with a 360 camera. And actually we've got Stephen, who works on the events program at a project that I manage, and he's going to be telling us a bit more about that later. But as you can see, they've got this amazing tour, and Mrs. Smith was a lady who lived in this village for over 80 years, and it's a kind of snapshot into rural Lincolnshire life, and you can go around her house and visit digitally. Now that's something that's maybe not accessible for everyone, but as you can see, is a really engaging way to learn about the past. And what they did alongside that was they created a pack of activities that you can see here. So once you've learned about Mrs. Smith and her life, you can then create a cushion like one of Mrs. Smith's cushions, or you can create, you can make some chutney according to one of Mrs. Smith's recipes. You can do a family pub quiz to kind of consolidate the learning about Mrs. Smith's life. So that way, from that one outcome of having a digital tour, they've built a whole range of different outreach activities for different audiences. Then we have the zine making workshop. So I manage a programme at Newington Green Meeting House, which is on the borders of Hackney and Islington. And this is something we've had a lot of success with. So the Newington Green Meeting House is famous for its kind of radical history, its dissenting history. And with that, it has a kind of publishing culture of around the 1800s and where people were kind of disseminating all these political ideas in a way of these, in an easy to follow way, in these kind of pamphlets. And we kind of replicated this idea of sharing informations by zines. So if you're new to zines, it was a big part of the counterculture in the like 70s and 80s that was taken up by a lot of sci-fi and music fans, especially within punk and things like that. And you'd create a basically little mini magazine of things that you like, things that you find interesting, maybe your favorite bands and some reviews of your favorite albums. And then you might share them or flog them for a couple of quid or something like that. So it's a kind of modern version of sharing these ideas. And so we offered these zine making workshops, small groups, and we asked people to sign up, and then we sent the materials that they'd need to their houses. So it was a kind of blended engagement. It was online. That's how they learned how to make a zine, because Lou here showed them how to do that, and they followed step by step during the Zoom call. But also they got the materials sent to their house, and then at the end they got a tangible thing that they kept. We had 122 people on the waiting list for the last one, so it was extremely popular, and also it got a really diverse young audience. I think you'll all probably know that when it comes to heritage, you know, that age group of say 16, 18 to 30 is quite hard to engage, and that was the kind of prime target for this kind of workshop. And it was a creative activity, so it also engaged a different audience, and that was a really successful one. And lastly, as another example, we've got this great project, which is Islington Pride, which is ran by the Islington Council, and also Error Agency, which were the developer of Layers of London, and have then moved on to create HuMap, which is a service that they then offer to allow community groups and other organisations to map their stories online. So similar to Layers of London, Islington's Pride allows people to go onto the map. You can read about people's stories and queer histories, but then you can also add your own. So again, it's a great example of a public history topic, because queer histories out of the academic framework haven't been shared and written about as much as they had, as much as they should have been. And then the other side of it is that people can go and add their own queer histories and stories to it. Now I'm going to hand over to Fran. So Fran is joining us from the Cottage Gallery and has been running an amazing, really impressive project about digital volunteering. So these are volunteers that have been volunteering, but from home digitally. And Fran's going to tell us a bit more about how that worked. Am I all right to hand over to you, Fran?
Hiya, yes, hi. And I'll just share my screen as well, if that's possible. Hi, everyone. So, firstly, thank you so much, Amy and Liam, for asking me to speak. I always love sharing what we're doing at the Cottage, so it's a perfect opportunity. And I love seeing everybody's events and projects in the chat as well. So I'm the volunteer officer at the Cottage, and today I'm going to very briefly talk about our volunteering kind of pre-COVID and how that has changed into more digital volunteering during lockdown. And I'm going to focus on one particular remote activity, which has been researching, editing and creating Wikipedia pages. So I support volunteers at the Cottage Connects Digitisation project, which is partly funded by the NLHF and by Cottage Connects donors. The project started in 2017 and we're due to finish in 2021. And the aim is to digitise 1.5 million photographs and make them freely available to the world. This is the team, so we're a small staff team of 5, and we've got over 800 volunteers who have done some kind of volunteering in the last 3 years. During COVID, we've got about 100 people doing things from home. And our images are kept in the Conway Library, which is at Somerset House. And our main collection is of art and architecture. That's what you can see in the red boxes here. And if you were to look inside, this is the kind of, these are the kind of photographs that you would find. So pre-COVID, 30 volunteers would be coming into the library every day across 2 shifts, and they were doing every part of the digitisation process. So when we moved to remote working, we didn't want to stop the volunteer programme for several reasons. We wanted to kind of keep up momentum because we do have a deadline. We wanted to maintain our volunteer community, which is so important for well-being. And we were not furloughed, so we were lucky we could come up with ways of supporting volunteering remotely and meeting some of our, continuing to meet our project aims. So to give you a brief overview of the kinds of things that we've been doing, we've got tasks which are directly fulfilling our digitisation targets. So volunteers collect metadata from home, and we do this in two different ways. One is with a big public platform that lots of museums use called Zooniverse, and that's a platform that allows you to upload images, and then contributors from all over the world can input data about what they see. So we've got over 4,000 people who have helped us with that so far. Another way that volunteers have been collecting metadata from home is through a more simple method of sharing some of our photographs and spreadsheets through Google Drive. And we share that just with our kind of in-house volunteers, and we've kept it to our existing volunteers because it required a bit more knowledge about how the collection works in person. But we also wanted to try different things and make the most of kind of what digital opportunities are out there. And these have helped us to fulfill the aims of sharing the collection really widely. So we have a blog, which volunteers can write kind of personal stories or research pieces or creative pieces. Over lockdown, we started making audio versions of the blogs. So volunteers were just using their phones or laptops to record their voices. And that's now available on Spotify, which is really nice. Wikipedia editing was part of this aim for sharing the collection. And we also used Layers of London over the summer and uploaded over 100 photographs to that map. So that was a way for volunteers to learn extra skills as well. Finally, we've got lots of activities just to maintain the community and communications. So we have a Slack forum, which is like a closed forum, and we have a fun channel, but we also have channels for different volunteering activities. We have a weekly email and a weekly Zoom, and we also have an art club. So there's lots of things that are just for fun and lots of things that are supporting the volunteering. So how does Wikipedia fit in more precisely, and what are we doing? So in our digitisation process, we have one task called attribution, which is where volunteers have been going through the collection and writing down the names that they find written on the mounts. So sometimes it's written or sometimes it's stamped. Hundreds of people have contributed to the Conway Library since it was started in 1903 by Martin Conway. So our list of names is about 600 people. When our website goes live in the future, we want users to be able to search by photographer name, but we'd also like to provide a really brief bio rather than just the name of the person. So this was a task that we did want to do, but we were going to do it in like a year's time or maybe 2 years' time. But it was something that we could do during lockdown. So we started to dish out these names for volunteers to research. So as you can see, we have this vision of changing these names into fully fledged kind of Wikipedia articles. And we started this task in April 2020 with just research. And then since June, we've been turning that research into Wikipedia pages. So it all starts with the research, and practically the way that we manage that is all through Google Drive. I know that some organizations might not be able to use it, but I really recommend it if you can. We include written instructions, we have a template to help direct the research, and we have other resources that we can share with volunteers. So we've so far researched over 550 people, and only 100 of them have been returned with no results. And that's because they've got names like John Smith, so it's just impossible to find them. But most of them, we have enough information for our website, and then a smaller amount, we have enough information to go on Wikipedia, because Wikipedia needs to meet certain kind of notability requirements. So step 2 comes after we've collected this research. So when volunteers return research, a staff member looks over it, and we can either say that it's left blank, we need more information, it's ready for our website, or it's ready for Wikipedia. If it's ready for Wikipedia, we can go on to this stage. So in June, we started training volunteers on how to edit Wikipedia, and we did this over Zoom. I did 10 30-minute training sessions between June and September. with each session having about 4 or 5 volunteers. And I kept the number quite small because everybody was brand new to editing. So I really wanted to take the time to train people and get them to test things out on the actual training session, and so that I could help them. I knew how to use Wikipedia, but if you don't, Wikimedia are a great organization who can help you, often for free actually, with Wikipedia editing. I also made training videos for kind of basic steps that are always needed when you're editing. We've got our Google Drive for sharing all of the information that needs to be uploaded, and we have a monster spreadsheet to keep track of everything. We also have a public Wiki project page, and the reason that we have this is because Wikipedia itself is obviously run by volunteers too, and some of them get curious about like, oh, what's this flurry of activity all linked to the Courtauld, and so having this page on Wikipedia helps them to kind of see what we're doing, and makes it all like really transparent. So on to some challenges and opportunities. So lots of our volunteers are not digital natives, which is why we had such thorough training. And the good thing is that completely new skills are being learned, which is really fabulous. Lots of our collection items don't have a lot of detail, so we just had initials or last names, which made some of the research quite difficult. However, the volunteers that have been doing it have said that they've really enjoyed developing their research skills, and ultimately it's bringing richness to the collection and a level of detail to the collection which we just never had before. Ensuring that the research is done consistently, or that Wikipedia editing guidance is adhered to, is another challenge. So that's why we have templates. When we're doing the training, we always kind of link back to familiar volunteer tasks if we can. There's also a lot of help out there, like I said, from the wider Wikipedia community. You're never alone, you can't break it. So it's all about kind of being bold. That's Wikipedia's motto. So volunteers just report kind of gaining a lot of confidence around this. Obviously, with the pandemic ongoing, a lot of volunteers have very varying commitments, and so they can't volunteer anymore, or lots of people just decide that they don't like editing Wikipedia. It can be quite hard. So working as a team, we're able to kind of reassign things if things get dropped. We kind of encourage people to like have another go, and like the stakes are very low, and Wikipedia has a sandbox area for learning, so you can kind of really learn before you start making big edits. And also that's why I decided to train a large number of people, which is something that I can do more easily online rather than in person, because then if there is a drop off, there's at least still a good number of people who are taking part. So for technical hitches and ongoing queries, we have all of our email and kind of Slack communications that we use. And finally, with information that we want to share, some of it is behind paywalls. Luckily, because we're attached to a university, we do have kind of e-resources access, which is great. But if there's ever anything that we can't access, we kind of flag it, and it's something that we can come back to in the future. We're just really happy that any information that we are getting is more than we had before. So a few numbers, we've had 84 individual volunteers who have helped us to do the research side of things, and together they've researched over 550 photographers, which is amazing. We've nearly finished our list. We've had 47 volunteers who were trained on how to use Wikipedia, and 28 of them have gone on to do some kind of editing. So there is that kind of drop off. A lot of our volunteers, were completely new. Everybody actually was completely new, and for some people the kind of learning curve was perhaps a bit too steep. But those 28 people who are making pages, they've made 74 brand new pages and improved 40. And the reason that the second number is a bit lower is because we wanted to start with the new ones, so the improving is kind of the second wave that we're doing. And we've got a bit of scope for the future as well. So obviously we have our wonderful photograph collection, and that's something that we'd like to start adding to Wikipedia. It's just not a priority at the moment, so we've only done a bit of a pilot. If you look up the Palm House on Wikipedia, or if you look up Ernst May, who is an architect, maybe you can spot our Conway images that we've put on there. So I've got a bit of feedback from volunteers as well about kind of how they found it. People report it being really worthwhile. The hardest thing is the kind of technical challenge. But I think that the rewards of being able to share the collection, teach people new skills, and generally get more information that we can use in our project as well, kind of far outweighs any of the negatives for us. I'd be really happy to take questions, or I don't know how much time we have or how far I went over my time limit, but you can always email me as well. I'm on digitisation.volunteering@courtauld.ac.uk. My name's Fran, and our volunteer manager is Caroline, so you might get one of us. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fran. Every time I hear more about this project, I get more and more inspired. I just think what you've managed to do is take a project which could have been quite a laborious task, looking for names, and and you've made it into this like really creative, inspiring thing. So thank you so much. That was loads of information, and I'm sure that people have questions. Just because we've got quite a tight time frame, because we're only working till 1, we're going to ask if you can keep questions till the end. So please do hold on to any questions that you've got, and you'll be able to ask Fran at about 1:45-ish when we go to questions or something like that, if that's okay. But thanks again so much, Fran. So I'm just going to share my screen again, 1 second. Okay, so I'm now going to, just in this last 20 minutes or so before we go for a break, I'm just going to talk more about, I'm going to kind of whiz through the different formats and the different types of ways that you can do public history engagement in an online setting. Some of these you're going to be very familiar with, and you probably do all the time. Some of them might be new ways of working for you, or might inspire some new kind of programming ideas. So before I start whizzing you through all the different types of ways you can engage people online, I just wanted to kind of cover some things which I think are kind of key things I've learned this year, particularly working in an online way. So it sounds kind of obvious, but different formats and different platforms are going to encourage different audiences. And this is kind of best practice when you're doing public engagement in person too. But obviously, if you're trying to get a specific audience to come to an event, you need to think about that in the planning stage. So for example, you might be very comfortable delivering a series of online talks. You might get good engagement, and your team are kind of comfortable and familiar working in that way. And then you think, well, we'd really like to get, I don't know, the local Turkish community really involved more in this. Now, it might be that that audience isn't going to be very attracted to an online talk series, for example. So it's going to change the way that you plan and deliver things. So what I'm going to say is, don't fall back on things that you always feel comfortable with. You might have to try and experiment and do different things. But one thing that I've learned this year is that it's been a really good time to experiment with things. I've done events and we've had 10 people turn up and it's not been particularly great and it's not worked. And that's fine. I learned from it, and then we've worked in other ways and put more energy into the things that have worked. So that point about kind of planning with specific audiences in mind, is about planning for that audience. So if you want a younger audience, and Liam's going to kind of cover this later, you're going to be promoting it on kind of Instagram. If you want to do a kind of live streamed where people are hearing from you or from speakers in real time, and it's for a family audience or something, you might want to use something like Facebook Live, because that's where you find these people. And different audiences are going to use different platforms. Now, in this way, I've found that it's also changed, working in an online way has completely changed the way that I try and get people in the local communities engaged with the histories and stories and objects or collections that I might work with. So I mentioned that I work at Newington Green at the minute, and I manage the programme there at the Meeting House. Now, we have a local Turkish and Kurdish community, and it's always been a big aim of the project is to work in like really meaningful ways and create a partnership with some of those local organisations. Now, I'm sure if you work on a NLHF, or any kind of funded project, then you have these remits that you've got to, try and engage communities and audiences that maybe aren't engaging with your kind of histories and stories at the minute, as is right. Now, what I've kind of noticed is that in the pandemic, a lot of these different groups and communities and organisations, they obviously had different needs. they might work in completely different ways. They might be running a food bank and they're not doing anything to do with childcare at the minute. They might not exist anymore, or they've just got very different priorities. As a kind of example of this, so one of the Turkish organisations locally to Newington Green kind of reached out and asked anyone in the community, is there anyone who's kind of willing to run some English conversation classes? We've got a lot of parents that are at home having to do childcare, and they speak Turkish at home and they're not having any opportunities to exercise their English skills. Now, it's not necessarily part of our delivery plan at Newington Green to do that. You know, we're funded, we know what we're doing, there's a plan for the next couple of years. It would have been very easy to kind of say, no, sorry, that's not really what we do. One of the things that we do a lot is, you know, programming around feminism and Mary Wollstonecraft, because she was one of our kind of famous faces. It doesn't immediately meet the needs of what we're supposed to be doing, but I used to be an English teacher and I wanted to create a relationship with the local Turkish community. And I did, and I ran a series of just online Zoom events very similar to this in a meeting, and each week we focused on a different topic. Now, inevitably, I then got Mary Wollstonecraft in, you know, after a couple of weeks in, and we started talking about what it was like to be a woman in Turkey, what it was like to be a woman in Britain, and what feminism means to the different women there. And then I introduced Mary Wollstonecraft. And then in that slight gap in November where we were allowed to have very small groups in, we were able to have some of these groups come in, and they came to the site, to the meeting house, with the pre-existing knowledge of who Mary Wollstonecraft was, and some basic knowledge about the local area and the kind of radical histories. And it meant that it was a kind of meaningful visit in a way that I think it would have not have happened before had we not have done that program. And now I have an amazing relationship with that organization, and we're always helping each other and doing things. They are translating all of our guides into Turkish so that we can have better we can be more accessible for the local community. And in turn, I've written personal statements for their children for university. Not written, sorry, I should have said helped to write personal statements and things like that. So it's become a kind of like mutually beneficial relationship. Platforms for kind of meetings and workshops. So Zoom, Google Meet, Teams, which is a Microsoft product, Google Classroom as well, but I'll be honest, I'm not as familiar with that format. These are the kind of formats that you can use for a kind of meeting style, which is what we're doing today. And it's very versatile because you can hold a meeting, a training session like this. It could be a workshop. So that Zine workshop that I did, I used the same kind of Zoom meeting setup. Workshops, webinars, lectures, they're very versatile, and that's because these kind of Zoom meetings have lots of different settings. You can mute everyone, you can unmute everyone, you can communicate through the chat, or you know, you can just speak if it's a smaller group of you, and there's many different functions. So if you use Zoom or are looking to use Zoom or Google Meet or Teams, it's really worth YouTube is full of tutorials on all the different functionalities, and it's really worth looking into that. There's more things that I thought that you could do. You can do polls where you can, it's a really easy, great way to get feedback. You can run breakout rooms, which means even if you've got a large audience, you can then split into those smaller groups and have discussions and chats. I run a community education program, and I've been using that one, and that's been really good. It's amazing what you can do in these kind of sessions. You can kind of create quite an intimate atmosphere. So it seems kind of a bit, you know, it seems kind of, you don't know anyone on this meeting, and then suddenly it pops up and there's lots of different people's faces and things like that. But within a short space of time, you can get people kind of sharing and feeling comfortable to contribute and things like that. So I run a program where each week we learn about the history of feminism and women's stories, and we have speakers, and then after the speakers, all the participants go into smaller groups and we discuss kind of what we think about certain things, and we approach different topics, and that way we've been able to kind of create a really kind of personal sharing space where people feel comfortable to kind of share their experiences, sometimes on topics that are quite challenging. Now, if you do have kind of topics that are particularly challenging, or you just want more audience control, a kind of webinar format might be something that you might be a bit better for the kind of thing you're looking to deliver. So a webinar format in a kind of Zoom style is kind of similar to the meeting style that we're using today, but there's a lot more audience control, to the point where you maybe don't even have a chat, and the only way that people are can engage with your session is that they're listening, and then they can submit a question. So there's a Q&A function, and people can submit a question there. That way, it's quite good for audience control if you're delivering a kind of lecture. Maybe you've got quite a high profile person coming and they're coming to speak. You don't want people constantly communicating through the chat, because it can get quite informal. I quite like that, but you know, if you've got quite a formal event, that might not be what you're looking for. They're quite good for panelists, because you've got panelist functions where you can give the panelists the ability to, you know, share screens like we were doing today and things like that. And I would say they're quite good for security. You know, if you're dealing with quite a challenging topic, for example, it might be, or, you know, you're talking about activism or something like this, and you want to know who's coming to your meeting or something like this, it's quite a good way to have quite a lot of audience control. And as someone who's kind of delivering that event, that can fill you with a little bit more confidence that your event is going to go smoothly. So I would say webinars are quite good for those reasons. Now, lives, you can use very many different platforms for live. So when I say lives, this is a live stream. You can do it from your laptop, you can do it from your phone, you can do it from your computer. And what you're doing is someone is watching you in real time on a public platform. So it's completely public. Anyone who has that link, or anyone who goes onto your YouTube or Instagram or Facebook, these are the different platforms that offer this service, they're going to be able to see you. So for example, in the half term recently, I delivered every day, Monday to Friday, some craft activities so that local children in Hackney and Islington could learn more about life in the past. And so we made tallow candles, and I showed them how to make 18th century wigs and things like that, which I did from my living room with a few props. And I just set up YouTube lives, told them that we're going to be live at 11 o'clock in the morning every day that week, and then people could log in. And we promoted that to family groups, to homeschooling networks, to local community organisations on Facebook and things like that. Now, they're great lives because they're free. You only need very basic equipment like your camera that's on your laptop, for example. And also there's a big digital legacy there. So you keep, you have it streamed live, but then afterwards it's hosted on your website, it's hosted on your YouTube channel or something like that. Because of that, even if on the day you get very low engagement, it doesn't matter. The resource that you've put into it then goes on your YouTube channel. So there's a constant stream of, you know, engagement as time goes on, as people stumble across it. And I think most importantly, it gives you the opportunity to recycle content that you've created. So I did that series in February half term, and then at Easter half term, then I re-promote them and say, hey, look at this amazing bank of craft activities. If you didn't do it with us last half term, now's your chance. This is what you need, and this are the links. So it means that it does take a bit of a resource to plan and deliver them, but once you've delivered them and they're there, you can reuse them. Now, lives are obviously great for engaging kids and family groups, and I think it's something that we can do in the current period to support kind of teachers that are struggling, you know, with this pressure to deliver live lessons. They don't always have the resources to be able to do that. Maybe it's somewhere that we can kind of step in and deliver that. And there's been some great examples that I've seen of in-person interpretation, which I think on, you know, if you're a site, you'll know that in-person interpretation, especially with young learners and families, is always a really engaging way to get people engaged with the stories and histories. If you've got an actress playing Queen Elizabeth I or something, and you're doing a live stream, and families and children can join and meet Elizabeth I and then ask them questions in a kind of hot seat fashion. That's really engaging for learners. It's quite easy to set up. I'm doing one at the Meeting House where we're getting an actress to play Mary Wollstonecraft, for example. And it's something that I think that you can take into the future, even when you're not focusing so much on digital stuff. Now I'm going to hand over to Michael in a moment, and Michael's going to tell us a bit more about Being Human, which is a kind of prime example of an online festival, or indeed a collaborative festival. But just to give an example, a kind of overview of what I mean when I'm talking about these kind of like festivals and collaborative efforts, Lambeth Heritage Festival, which we were involved in with Lays of London, is a good example of this. So you yourself at your site, you know, you might have different skill sets. You might have areas of expertise of things that you deliver, but there might be things that you want to do creatively. You might want to work with different sectors or artists or other heritage organisations that work in different ways to you. You might not have the resource to be able to do that in-house. Now, if you work collaboratively with other partners and other projects and organisations, it means that you can work together, share resource, share your networks, and maybe work on something that's a bit bigger than something that you could deliver. So for example, I've been working this way a lot this year because at Newington Green Meeting House, it's a small project and it's new. And when you're new, you really need to rely on the kind of contacts and the reputation of other organisations have to kind of work off the back of those. And we've done lots of work with Benjamin Franklin House and Wesley's House and the Museum of Methodism. And collectively, we can share all our schools, contacts, we can share all of the kind of skills that we have in our teams collectively, and that way we can work on something which is bigger than maybe we could have delivered ourselves. So now I'm going to hand over to Michael, and he's going to tell us a little more about Being Human and the experience this year of taking that online.
Yeah, thanks, Amy, and hello again, everyone. For those of you who don't know Being Human Festival, it's a national festival. It takes place right across the UK and beyond. Actually, we do have a few international events, and it's a festival of the humanities and of humanities research. But really, it's really kind of focused on making those meaningful connections to communities. So whether it's in Swansea or in Sheffield or in South London, it's really about taking cutting edge research across humanities subjects. So from history to literature to classics and so on. And just finding points of connection, really, where it overlaps with and becomes relevant to people's everyday lives. We've been running the festival since 2014, so it's been going for quite some time now. And over that time, we really kind of honed a model of how we operate. We have little funding grants and things that we give out, but we also have a lot of events that are just self-funded by people from other pots of money. And yeah, I guess over the years, what we've learned is kind of a lot of what Amy has been saying and what other people have been saying around these kind of lessons of, if you want to reach a particular community, if you want to reach a certain audience, you really have to go where they are and do what they're interested in, rather than, you know, doing what you're interested in and staying where you are. So we have a lot of events in museums, galleries, marketplaces, shopping centres, all of that kind of thing. So on a normal year, we'd really be encouraging people to kind of get off campus and get out there and work with people where they are. But then obviously COVID happened, you know, out of the blue in 2020, and we were already kind of half organised really with the festival, kind of halfway there. And we suddenly had to, as with a lot of festivals and a lot of projects, we had to have a kind of urgent and radical rethink of what it is that we were going to deliver and how we were going to do it. And we did move online. I think, we had a handful of activities that happened in kind of real life, or in person, because at the time that we ran the festival, there were still a few things that were allowed to happen in that way. But the majority of stuff moved online. But in doing that, we were really, really keen that we didn't want to lose that kind of core function of the festival, which is, at its very basic level, it's all about getting outside of your bubble. It's about getting outside of an academic bubble, and reaching people who wouldn't usually go to this type of event. So, we did that in various ways, and our kind of local organisers did that in various ways. But I mean, people were just incredibly inventive. There were so many different formats that happened. There were Zoom events like this one. But the ones that were more successful, I guess, were the ones that they didn't just plonk something onto Zoom and expect that people would, find it. They still worked with those kind of local community partners, with museums, with heritage organisations, local history groups, archives, things like that. Worked with their kind of existing audiences and brought them along to the event. There were some quite ambitious projects. There were, I mean, we had one that was a kind of a virtual online museum late, where they're actually live streaming from the museum and going around and kind of broadcasting live from the collections. But there were some really small scale ones as well. And I think, it was more about the kind of thought that had gone into it, really, rather than the ambition of the kind of format and the technology. We had events where people were doing kind of cookery lessons or kind of tastings and things like that. So people would put, like, to do this event, you need to just have a few things ready to hand. So maybe, like, some particular types of food or kind of common things that you might have in your cupboard. And then that was used for a kind of a sort of tasting session or something like that. But one particularly kind of fun and innovative activity that I wanted to show you, really, was an event that ran in Sheffield called the People's Palace of Possibility. And this was an event that had a little bit of funding from us. But basically, it was a kind of a collaborative performance event that operated both online and through the post. So really, what they did is they had a lot of stuff on their websites. And the whole project was really, it was based around this whole idea that people were going to be involved in a collaborative kind of project that would be drawing together various different responses to the city and local environments. And what they did is basically sent out little tasks and little mini projects for people to do that were, as they put it, small acts of creative disobedience. And they were very small, and they weren't very, like, nothing that would get people into any kinds of trouble. But it would be things like reclaim a small piece of public space, maybe by doing a chalk drawing or something, and then take a photograph of it and add it to this kind of archive that was developed over the course of the project. And just to sort of show you how they managed it, they actually sent out parcels in the post. So this is my one. You can see it says Michael on it. And the parcel contains a little kit inside it. So again, I'll just try and show you that. So when you open the parcel, you get some instructions that tells you what to do. You get a few things that allow you to take part. So there's a chalk in there, and there's a few other little small props and bits and pieces and badges and things like that. And you can see these are not high tech or expensive things. They're all quite cheap. This wouldn't have cost a lot of money to put together, although it would need some time, obviously, some kind of creativity and some money to send things out through the post. But in a way, kind of quite a lo-fi kind of a project. But all of this, the instructions and the props and all of this kind of stuff, this sort of took you to the website, and then there would be other stuff on the site that took you through to the next kind of stage. So it was kind of online primarily, but you had this stuff arriving through the post as well. And it was just a really nice way of doing something slightly more engaging, slightly more personalized, slightly more kind of interactive, rather than just relying purely on the online. So I think with any online activity, there's always the question of, well, you know, how are people going to come across it? How are you going to drive people to a website? How are you going to encourage them to do things once they're there? What are the steps that people have to go through? Or how are you going to kind of incentivize or turn things into like a bit of a game? And this probably relates to some of the stuff that Fran was saying as well about volunteer engagement. So that was just one project. We had a few that actually sent out activity posts, activity packs and things through the post. So a bit of a mixture, I guess, of, you know, old school technology or old school infrastructure, you know, the post, and new tech, you know, online and new platforms and things like that. So I guess just to sort of summarize, really, I'd really encourage if people are thinking about taking things online, that's great. And obviously that works really well for a lot of people. But don't forget that there's other things that you can do around that. So working through the post, some of our activities in Being Human Festival last year, they actually did door-to-door deliveries of things. So they were, you know, walking around a particular place and, you know, posting things themselves by hand through people's letterboxes. So yes, you know, the internet and digital activities and online stuff doesn't exist in a vacuum, and it's nice to kind of find ways of breaking down the barriers of the screen, and, you know, maintaining the kind of human aspect of what you're doing. I just noticed there's an interesting kind of thread in the chat about different platforms and their benefits and drawbacks, which I totally agree with. But I think sometimes it's almost like whatever the platform, it's the other thinking as well that goes into the event. And it's, you know, thinking about an online event is no different in a way to thinking about a real life or in-person event. If it's not in the right place, pitched to the right community and the right audience, and you haven't sort of prioritized their needs and interests, then it probably won't work as well as you hope it will. But if you do, then it will. So that's probably enough from me, but I'll be around throughout the rest of the session as well, obviously. So I'm happy to kind of pick up any questions as we go.
Great. Well, everyone, welcome back. As I said at the beginning, my name is Liam, and I work with Amy at Dig Yourself, and I'm going to be talking to you all a bit today about identifying and reaching audiences online. I think we've heard some really great examples of public history work online and lots of interesting ideas for different kinds of events and workshops. I especially enjoyed Fran's presentation on remote volunteering. I think the restrictions of the past year have kind of forced us all to be a bit more creative. I think that even when society opens back up a bit more, there'll be lots of lessons that we can take forward. Like, I think that doing events online and remote volunteering can actually be a bit more inclusive and allows you to have a greater reach, like geographically, and all people who, it's more accessible, I suppose. So I just hope that some of what we've discussed already is already getting your minds whirring for different activities. But of course, for these kind of activities, people need to know about you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about communicating and building your audiences online. I'll talk a bit about different social media platforms and that kind of thing, and just general principles of effective communication on the internet. So due to time limitations, it will be a bit of an overview, but hopefully it will, the general principles will be useful for everyone, whether you're kind of starting a small public history project yourself, or if you work as part of a bigger institution. Just look at the chat in case you're saying you can't hear me. No, you're not saying that. Okay, so where was I? So yeah, as I was saying, as I developed a lot of my experience working in this area on the Layers of London project, based at the IHR, which if you don't know, you should check it out. So I'll use some examples from that work, as I think it's a really great case study, and I'll also share some other highlights from really cool public history work on social media. Okay, so I've split this presentation into a few general headings, and the first of which is identifying your audience. So I've seen this a lot reading different kind of marketing strategies. The first thing you're supposed to do is to reflect and think about who you are. And so as I say here, to know what to say, you should think about who you're trying to say it to. So I think this can seem a bit abstract to begin with, but doing this work can really help you on lots of things, deciding what platforms to use, what kind of voice is appropriate for you, and where you might be able to find the audience you're looking for. So before you think about your audience, I think it's important to turn inward and ask yourself, who am I? Ask these questions of, what is my aim? What do I do and why do I do it? And kind of get a clear idea of what your goals are. And also kind of ask yourself what different ways you can categorize the work you're doing. So I think it's really good just to like take a few of these questions and just as a starting point to write them out and write out some answers just in terms of the project you're doing and what kind of audiences you're trying to engage. Say, for example, when I worked at Layers of London, it was very useful to break down the project into the different constituent elements, which I think really opens up a lot of different angles for promotion, and it really tells you about the different kind of audiences you can engage with. So for example, at Layers of London, it was kind of, at the basic level, it was a digital history mapping project, which is interesting, but the string of words isn't going to be like the most appealing to maybe a general audience. But as one of the major parts of the project was we encouraged members of the public to upload histories and stories and images and kind of ephemera from London's past, we could break it down into lots of different ways. So it was a project about World War II in some ways, and a project about protest movements or about theatre. And like when you break it down with these different elements, it kind of gives you ideas of how you can sell the project or how you can tap into different audiences who might be particularly interested in those things. It also gives you ideas for like going with the, say, promoting on social media, gives you ideas for like calendar dates that you could capitalize on. Say, for example, with theatre, you could, I was going to say the BAFTAs, but I don't think that's theatre. I forgot to look up what the theatre award show is. But say when the theatre award show is on, you can say, oh, this is theatre award show's on tonight. We have all this information on our website about theatre. This theatre burned down on this date on the premiere, after the premiere of this show, and if this won the award, then anyway, you see what I mean. It just gives you different ideas for different ways you can exploit what's going on, or I suppose what's trending is what they say in the biz. So another question I have here is, what do I find engaging? So just reflect about what you find interesting on the internet when you're browsing social media or on different websites, what catches your eye, because I think that will be like what appeals to a lot of other people too. So then after you think about who you are, you think about your audience, or at least who your desired audience is. So what different kinds of people am I trying to reach, and where do they get their information? So I think it's useful to, as a starting point, to come up with some totally imaginary people that represent the kinds of people you would like to engage with your work, and ask yourself questions about them. Those marketing strategies I mentioned earlier recommend completing whole personality profiles for your audience, which can be kind of a daunting task, but a really useful thing to do, as I think it gets you thinking about what different kinds of things appeal to different people and why. So if you're a big organization with lots of resources, you could do extensive user research and market testing. But obviously, most of us don't have that kind of resource, but we do have our imaginations, and also the resources that are around us, like our friends and family and our colleagues. And you can ask them, what do they find interesting on the internet, what attracts them, and use the kind of resources that you have around you. So I just wanted to highlight quickly a tool that you can use to kind of guide this brainstorming. This is called an empathy map, and you can find it on Google, and there's also lots of guides about how to fill it in, but it just kind of guides you through all the different questions you can ask yourself about your potential audiences. So just say, for example, the first question is, who are we empathizing with? So then you might think about the audiences you're trying to reach. Say you're trying to reach a school age person doing their GCSEs. So maybe you'll say, invent a person like Jimmy, who's 15 and doing his GCSEs. And then you go through all these questions, and what do they need to do? They need to engage with your public history project. And what do they see? What do they say? What do they hear? That's kind of all the things that are contesting for their attention. And where do they get their information? And where do they get the information online and in other ways? And it just kind of gets you thinking about different people and how you can engage with audiences. I think they use this tool in lots of different fields, like software design, psychology, marketing, but it's very useful just as a starting point to get you thinking about that kind of thing. So I'll just move on now. So next point is, so you've thought about who your audience is, and now you need to think about how you're going to reach them. So these are just some different channels that you can use online to put out information. And I think just first off, I wanted to mention it's really useful to have a mailing list. I think it's one of the best things you can have for your online communications, because it's kind of a guaranteed audience that you can build over time. So just to say, one of the platforms for this that I've used in the past and it's very good is Mailchimp, which I'm sure other people have used. It's free up to 2,000 contacts, and it has lots of useful information about email design and how to write well and get people to click through on the links. So I think that's a really useful platform, but there's lots of other ones as well that you might be more appropriate for your particular reason. What I say here is look for opportunities to build your list. So yeah, so say you have people attending events, you should definitely get those people to sign up for your list, because if they attend the event once, that's good, but then you want to turn them into like repeat customers, I suppose, or repeat visitors or something, or people who are repeatedly engaging with your project and kind of building the relationship in that way. And having them mailing list is very is a guaranteed way of keeping that relationship in some way. And also, I'd say what I say here is send out your newsletter regularly. Maybe you're very busy and you need to send out one on a weekly basis, or maybe monthly, or maybe you're not so busy and it's okay to just do it on a quarterly basis, highlighting some events or some maybe news from the past few months. But I think it's good to be regular, because it gets people, it pings people to remind them about your project. And yeah, just make sure it's very easy to find. I'd say, like say if you have a website, you should have it very prominently featured on the homepage or even in a pop-up window, just to make it really easy for people to sign up, and have it linked through from your social media as well. So just touch briefly on the different social media platforms. Different social media platforms can be used for different things, and this is kind of where that audience brainstorming comes in handy, is that you might need to decide what's going to be the most appropriate one for you. So for example, if you're trying to engage with people who work in the heritage sector, I think maybe Twitter is a good platform for that, as there are lots of professional people on it who are trying to keep up with the latest developments in the sector, and lots of the big institutions as well. Say if you were trying to reach a more general audience, you might find that Facebook is a better option. You can tap into all these local groups. Like I have a screenshot here, I'm not sure if you can see it, but there's all these groups like Nottingham from the old days, Britain and Irish farming from the old days, the good old days. So I'm sure you've seen these kind of groups before that exist in like all areas and neighborhoods of people posting old pictures from when they were growing up or old stories. And these are a natural audience for kind of a lot of public history projects, but it's not just kind of those groups exist. There's ones for all kinds of interests. So like cycling or sewing or knitting or something like that. So there's these groups that might be a natural audience for you, and it doesn't take much. You can just search using the search function and then just send them a message to say, hi, I think your group might be interested in my project. And that's a really good way of reaching people who are definitely going to be interested. And also, I think you probably all know that Facebook is very good for events, because when you click attending, it shows all your friends that you're attending. So that's a very good way of building potential audiences. But say, for example, if you're running a project with a strong visual element, like you have a photographic archive or it's an art project, Instagram might be a good platform for you. And I also have like the logo for TikTok here, which I think I'll talk about a little bit later with a good example of public history on TikTok. Obviously, Amy was saying before that teenagers are a difficult audience to engage with heritage. So they love TikTok, so I hear. So if that might be a good way of engaging with that group, if that's something that you're prioritizing for your project. But I think, yeah, decide where to focus your energy is a really important point, because we all are working with limited resources and don't have time to dedicate to all these different platforms. So I think you need to decide based on like what the priorities of the project are and what the audience you're trying to reach are. Decide where you should best spend your energies, because I think it's better to do one social media platform well or two than doing 4 or more in a mediocre way. So yeah, it just comes back to your audience and thinking about where they get information and what's the best use of your time. So once you have decided about what channels you're going to use, I think it is good to think about how you're going to build your audience. And I just have a few quick tips for this. So what I say here is tap into the networks you are already part of. So as by way of example, when I was working at Layers of London is a project that's based at the Institute of Historical Research, which is part of the School of Advanced Study, which is part of the University of London, which is connected to all the other universities in London. So there was lots of other online avenues for publicity, like all these other social media accounts with the different institutions and the different mailing lists. And it's really easy just to reach out to your colleagues who are running these different accounts and say, hi, can you just follow us and make sure you share our stuff, because we're trying to build our audience on our social media. And then it's not just, even if you're not part of a big institution like that, we're all part of networks. So you might have family or friends who are particularly active on social media, and you can ask them, or maybe your project is being funded by an external organization and you can just please ask them to prioritize sharing your work while you're beginning, just to kind of get your name out there for the start. And I think another useful thing, which harks back to that audience profile again, is to think about who already has your audience. So again, for example, at Layers of London, I have a screenshot here from The Londonist, which some of you might know. It's a website that features lots of news about London, cultural events, and also like kind of fun and interesting articles like Secrets of the Tube or The Surprising History of London's Sewers. So we thought that people who are interested in that website would probably be interested in our website, because we have lots of different interesting stories about London's history. So we got in touch with them and we asked them, would you mind writing an article about us? And they didn't mind at all. And they did it a bunch of times whenever we had some news. And every time they did, we would get a big increase in traffic to the website. So it was a really good avenue for us to kind of see an audience that we wanted, and then they can share it with us. We're not taking it away from them, they're just directing people in our way. By contrast, one time the project was featured in the Daily Telegraph, which we think, has a big national circulation. It's read by thousands and thousands of people. And we thought that'd be really good publicity, but we actually didn't see that much difference in the traffic after that. So I think my hypothesis, my theory, is that the people who are reading the Daily Telegraph aren't necessarily looking for fun stories about London. They're looking for international affairs, news, economics, whatever. So the Londonist, where it's kind of more guaranteed, was actually a better avenue for us to pursue. And I think, yeah, just also this point applies to, say, other social media accounts or, say, influencers in your sector. So I have a screenshot here from Jay Foreman, who's this guy who makes like humorous videos about the history and culture of London. And he has like a reasonably large following on social media and on YouTube. So I started retweeting all his stuff from the Layers London account because I thought our audience would be interested in it. But then soon enough, he started retweeting our stuff and sharing it with his audience, which I think is very effective for us. We got a lot of followers from that. So yeah, just thinking about who has my audience and how can I get them to give it to me or share it with me anyway. So just the last slide here, I think, is just communicating with your audience. So you've thought about who your audience is, you thought about the channels you're going to use, and you're working on building up your following, but what are you going to say to them? And how are you going to communicate on social media or on your newsletter? So I think what I say here is you can't just broadcast, you have to engage. So this is about getting a ratio between like your promotional content and your like entertaining content or engaging content. So like sometimes I've seen like big cultural institutions that have, say, like 100,000 followers on their Twitter page. But then each individual tweet only gets like 5 likes or something, which is so a very low percentage of their followers are actually engaging with their content. And this is always, I find, because they're just putting out kind of promotional stuff. They're just saying, please come to our event or read our blog post. They're not really, it's not entertaining or that interesting if you're not interested in the institution itself. So I think it's important to balance your promotional activity with sharing interesting stuff, sharing visually captivating stuff. Some jokes memes are always a big hit. So I think, and sharing what other people are doing, because I think it should be kind of like a community kind of thing, sharing what other projects you're interested in and supporting others, and then they'll support you too. So I think for examples of, or for ideas of how you should communicate, you should look at what other people are doing or find what you kind of admire. So I have just collected a few examples of fun public history social media stuff here on this slide. I hope you can all see. So this is a tweet from the Museum of English Rural Life. Their Twitter page is sort of famous now because they've gone viral a bunch of times. I think if anyone knows about the picture of the big sheep that was captioned, "What an absolute unit," and then got shared thousands and thousands of times, and they have a big reputation now for hilarious social media. I think all their captions are very dry and sarcastic and witty. I think the contrast between the Museum of English Rural Life doesn't sound like comedy gold, and the hilarity or hilarity of their tweets is kind of why that's so successful. So I think that's a really good example of you don't have to like play by the script of what you think your project is or what other people think your project is. You can kind of try new things and try things that might be successful, especially successful on social media and the internet. It might be a different tone for, say, what you would publish on your website, or if you had a museum, you might want to be more authoritative there. But social media, you can try different things and be a bit silly. And I don't think I could come up with as many jokes as the person who writes the Museum of English Rural Life tweets. So you can also play to other strengths that you have. Like, say, I have an example here from the Museum of Youth Culture, who collaborated a lot with the IHR. They have a great collection of photos that they've collected from the public, and they have really good eye for visuals. So all their social media posts are illustrated with really attractive images, which I think is another great way of drawing people in and sharing like valuable content, I suppose. And then lastly, then I have a tweet from Layers of London. So in this case, we challenged people to send us in pictures of their local post boxes, inspired by a tweet from Professor Catherine Clark of the IHR. And this was just done totally off the cuff, and we didn't really think about it that much, but it was a huge success. And this was during lockdown, when people are going out on their one walk a day, sorry. So they're sending in pictures, and I think, yeah, it's really good to ask questions and submit challenges to people, and you know things are going well when people actually take the time to go back at you. And sometimes I put out questions and no one would respond, and that doesn't really matter. And I think that's a good point, because if a social media post doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't really matter, because no one's going to remember it. So you can just try again, try something else, and it's all kind of trial and error. So you have to see what's working for your project and keep going, keep trying. And then lastly, I just wanted to highlight the Black Country History Museum, which is in Dudley, who've taken TikTok by storm. I think they just started it last summer, as far as I know. They've been very successful by putting up really good videos. I might just click into them. I hope you can see this.
Okay, let's have a look. Open wide. Well, I can see most of your teeth are rotting out of your gums, and I can see the one that you've been complaining about. It's probably all that cheap sugar you've been eating from the West Indies. That and the fact that toothpaste hasn't been invented yet. Well, there's only one solution. We're going to have to yank it out. But seeing as it's 1885, what I'm going to do first is inject your gum with this syringe filled with cocaine, and then I am literally just going to yank that tooth out with these. Let's hope you don't pass out from blood loss, eh? Sound good to you? Excellent.
Yeah, so they just had, in that first one, they had someone pretending to be a dentist from 1885, kind of making a joke, but I think it was very effective. But even if you don't have someone who's willing to act on camera, that second video just had images from their collection, which I think was very effective. And so yeah, these have been very successful. And if you want to learn more, there's an article in The Guardian about it, how a Dudley museum became a TikTok sensation. And as we were saying before, it's very hard to engage like those younger audiences with heritage. So this might be, if you're creative and willing to learn how to use TikTok, I think it could be a really effective way to communicate your work. So yeah, and the last point there is just find your voice. What is an appropriate tone for you? As we've been saying, you can try lots of different things, and maybe it's something, if you're very funny, like the Museum of English Rural Life people, then maybe that might be a good thing you could do. And also thinking back to what we were talking about in the beginning about what would appeal to your audience or the audience that you're hoping to get. So that's it from me for the moment. And now I'm going to hand over to Stephen Morrison from Newington Green Meeting House, who's their online coordinator, online events coordinator. He's been doing online events for the past year and has lots of good tips for some tools that you can use for effective online engagement.
Stephen. Hi there. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. So hello, everyone. My name's Stephen. I go by he, him. I'm a 30-year-old white male with a shaved head and round glasses. I'm calling from home today, so I've got my living room in the background with my dining table too. So as Liam mentioned, I've been the events coordinator at Newington Green Meeting House for over a year now. My job is to help organise the logistical aspects of events and run the AV system. I also do a lot of the content editing, podcasts, videos, virtual tours and things like that. As well as this, I'm also the live drummer for a band called Young Fathers and work a lot on the tech side of live shows. With them, I've toured the world for 10 years in a huge range of venues and performed on all sorts of broadcasting platforms. I also used to organise music and art events in Glasgow and Edinburgh for 6 years, where I used to live. So I'll move on to my top tips for working online and in the virtual world that we've learned over the past year as part of the Heritage Project at Newington Green Meeting House. Am I up as a speaker view just right now? Can everyone see my screen okay? Yeah, okay. So my first tip is to up your streaming game. You can do this by using broadcasting programs like Open Broadcaster software. OBS, which is free to use, you can use this to create professional streams and presentations. I'm linked up to OBS just now, so I can give you a little example of some of the features available. We'll start with the basics, like adding a logo. So if you can see over my shoulder here, that's the Newington Green Meeting House logo. So what I'm doing is clicking through some scenes that I've set up. Each scene is like a slide where you add in each of the features. And now I'll add in some text and images. Okay, so this looks a little bit busy, but you can get really creative with this program, adding in multimedia to do your presentations or adding more than one camera to a single screen. This can be handy during things like virtual workshops with one camera on the presenter and the other on the materials, switching between the two or showing both on the same screen. It can also be used in a live setting, like the live streamed events that we do in the meeting house. We have 2 cameras installed and streamed to YouTube. So this is a snippet from one of our events showing the transitions between the cameras and a PowerPoint presentation. OBS can be seen like a PowerPoint presentation with a lot more features available. An OBS presentation is also made in a similar way to PowerPoint, so those skills can be easily transferred. I'll use OBS throughout my talk so you can get more of a feel for it. Another program which has these features and more is Elgato. You can pay for the service, but it packs a bit more of a punch than OBS, and the user interface is a lot simpler to use. So here's a quick snapshot which you can see. It gives you a bit of an idea of what I'm looking at the moment and how I'm controlling things. So reuse and recycle is my second tip. When doing online events, you want to be recording it. This is quite simple when using Zoom and similar platforms. Just hit the record button and the video will be processed at the end of the event. When streaming events live on sites like YouTube, the video will be recorded automatically, where once you have the recording, you can transform it into a video and a podcast to spread the reach and accessibility of the event. To add an extra layer of professionalism and make it more engaging, it's worth adding a quick intro, outro, and cleaning up any of the mistakes in the video with using editing software. I'll talk more on software to use later. So here's a quick example of the intro that we use at Newington Green Meeting House. So we use this intro for most of our videos, and it's made quite simply on Sony Vegas and using other image editing software. So once you have the video, you can recycle it and make it into a podcast for extra accessibility and reach a wider audience. An easy and free way to do this is using Spotify's online service, Anchor.fm. Sign up, click new episode, and drag and drop your video file in there. It will automatically convert it into an audio file for you, as long as it's not too big. Then just add in some information and within a few hours to a day, your recorded event becomes a podcast available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and a lot more. So this brings me to my next step. Learn the tools of the trade. To make videos, podcasts, and other online media, it's useful to learn a program or two to give it a final polish before uploading it. Everyone's budget's a bit different, and often there isn't room to pay content editors to do the work. If you're looking to do a simple task such as top and tail a video with logos and make some small edits, then it can be easy to do it yourself once you've learned the basics of any program. This gives a more professional feel to the video and cleans things up to make the content a bit more engrossing for viewers. Everyone's skill set is different, but there's a range of programs and platforms out there for everyone, from free and easy to advanced and expensive. So I'll start from the beginning with recording content. So the pandemic has made it difficult to meet in person, but you can still hold interviews for video and podcasts via video conferencing platforms. When it's possible to record content firsthand, say taking photographs of an exhibition, and a professional photographer isn't possible, using your phone or hiring a DSLR will often do the trick. You can often find equipment you might need, whether it be a vintage camera or a drone with a GoPro. Fatlama.com and other hire by the day sites have got you covered, often at a very affordable price. The auto setting on modern cameras will give you a high quality footage to work with. So images, Photoshop and other Adobe programs are the most well-known tools for image editing, as well as being the industry standard. They're great if you already have the skill set, but it can be a bit complicated and expensive if you're just starting out or looking to make simple edits. Paint.net is the next best thing. It's free to download, it has similar capabilities, but it's also a lot more user-friendly. Canva, the free to use online platform, is even more accessible and even offers pre-made templates for the image dimensions of each social media platform. For example, if you want to make a Facebook banner or Instagram post, the template is there for you to drag, drop and resize straight away. So videos, when it comes to video editing, Adobe holds the crown again with the more advanced programs, Premiere Pro and After Effects. I personally prefer the simpler interface of Sony Vegas and one-off payment as opposed to the Adobe monthly subscription. For quicker, easier, and more stylistic edits, online video editing tools such as Vimeo, Create, Biteable, and Clipchamp can be used for free. We offer drag and drop editing with a range of filters and add-ons to make your video a little bit more interesting. You'll have to upgrade it to a paid plan to remove the watermarks though. So we've got audio now. So most audio editing will be done in conjunction with the video editing. But when it comes to things like audio tours and other recordings that require high quality sound, a digital audio workstation or DAW is needed. So Pro Tools is the industry standard and it's used in studios across the world, followed by Ableton Live, Reason and others. These programs often require a lot of learning to use, and the same results for basic recording can be achieved on free software like GarageBand and Audacity. And you can use an audio interface like Focusrite and a simple microphone to get the same quality. So no editing suite is complete without a multimedia converter, and you can use Format Factory, which is a freeware program, and it allows you to convert any type of file. For example, if your video happens to be a bit too big for Anchor to convert into an audio file for a podcast, just drop it into Format Factory and you'll have the option to change it to any type of audio. To learn these programs, there's plenty of free tutorials on YouTube and message boards where people help with technical issues and things like that. So this is how I learned how to use all of these programs. My final tip is to use virtual spaces. With most of the world in lockdown, people are looking for new ways to explore. Creating an interactive and informative virtual space is a great way to give people that opportunity. So 360-degree images and videos can be used to create virtual tours like the ones we've created at the Meeting House. I'm showing you some footage of that at the moment. You can use your smartphone to create a panoramic 360 image, upload it to Google Poly, Facebook, or other platforms. To get a more seamless look, you can buy a 360 camera. Good ones start from about £150. These enable you to shoot 360 images and video in 4K as well as stream live. So I've just shown you some footage there that we've shot on that camera. So VR exhibition creators like Art Steps, this is some footage from Art Steps here. These allow you to create or recreate rooms and spaces virtually like we did with the Mary Wollstonecraft room. You can design whole buildings with artworks and objects to explore along with interactive elements. So it's quite exciting for people. We also have virtual meeting rooms like Meetup, which I'm showing at the moment. So basically these are spaces online where you can host meetings and events, communicating and exploring together through personalized avatars. This can be quite fun and gives a bit more of a relaxed feeling for an online event. So basically the events of everything I've talked about today are in the PowerPoint, which I'm sure Amy and Liam will pass on if you need them. I hope you found this talk useful, and feel free to get in touch with any questions. And I'll pass you back over to Amy and Liam now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stephen. As ever, Stephen sharing his magic tips and sorting out all sorts of wonderful creative ways of kind of delivering these kind of events and programs and things like that. So there was lots of questions there about how to access this recording and the links and things like that. And as Stephen said, we can share the PowerPoint. Gemma shared the link there of where this recording is going to be archived to. And of course, you can contact Liam and I at Dig Yourself too, if you're interested in kind of doing similar work in the future or things like that. So we've got 10 minutes left for questions now, and it might be questions that you want to ask me and Liam. It might be questions that you want to ask some of the speakers that we've had. So I know we've had quite a few questions rolling through the chat, but now the chat log is quite long. If you've got something that you want to ask, please do put it in the chat. Or let us know that you've got something that you want to ask, whether that's you want to unmute yourself and ask, or whether you just want to read it out in the chat. That would be great. So feel free to put your question in the chat, or let us know you want to unmute yourself and you can ask us and the speakers. Karen has a question about copyright. When showing a work of art that you don't own yourself online, what is the permission copyright position on doing that? I'm not an expert in this, Karen, but we did come across a lot of this kind of thing when we worked on Lays of London, didn't we, Liam? Because that was, a really big part of that. So just always in that situation, just to cover your back, I would always try and contact the person who owns that and ask express permission. And then go from there. And then best case scenario, they would give you the way to cite that. So they would say, oh, can you please say work by Michael Leeds, and this is the website, for example. And that would be the best case. And I think if you're working on a kind of educational project, 95% of the time people are very happy to work in that way, but it's always worth checking with the original content creator.
And I think old paintings, old works of art are in the public domain, I would imagine. Don't quote me on that, though.
And we're getting some links too for events and examples of good practice, which is great. Please do share them. It's been so inspiring hearing about all the different projects and organisations that are here. I didn't know about the Devil's Project Museum, and now I do, and I can't wait to come and visit. And Stephen, you're from round there, aren't you? From that way on?
Yeah, so I was brought up in the southwest of Scotland and then moved to Edinburgh, went to art school there, and then lived in Glasgow for 7 years, and then finally found my way to London.
To Newington Green, where we're very lucky
to Newington Green, yeah.
Yeah, so any questions, please? Dudley's giving some advice there on the copyright.
Oh yeah, that's a very good point. If you want to learn more about public history, there's IHR have a MOOC, and actually Amy and myself, and I believe Michael as well, are in it. So if you want to see more of us, it's on Coursera, and you get a certificate if you complete it.
And that covers all sorts of different creative ways to engage the public with history, and different, online and offline ways. I'm focusing on schools. I know that that's not been a focus of the workshop today, but I know that probably we all feel like, engaging with schools is a really difficult part when it comes to working in our sector. So they cover things like that. So definitely, yes. Victoria, can we share the link to the MOOC again? I think Liam, you had that on with Michael. There we go. Yeah, it's definitely, if this is kind of new, or you're thinking of working in different ways, it's definitely worth checking that out.
And also some people are sharing that not all old paintings are in the public domain, so I'm not an expert in that area, so they should be.
I think that I'm seeing if this is a question from, sorry, it's hard to keep up with the chat. Anna, yeah, that's really interesting. I think that one thing that I'm kind of noticing is that kind of like community education way of working. It doesn't have to be, like a seminar series or something, but creating this kind of space where maybe you, like the zine making workshop that we were talking about, and like the kind of feminist history, women's history program that I was talking about that I've worked on recently, engaging different people in things that they're kind of that they're interested in, making space, and then you're building up a relationship so they know your organization, they know what it is that you offer, they know you're taking on feedback and you care about that particular audience, and then you'll program according to what their interests are, has been and it's just such a great thing to be able to offer and share your kind of stories and histories and get people to engage. We I know, and maybe a lot of people have found this, that there's been a lot of success getting a real great diversity of speakers. People are a little bit freer, or if not freer, they're a bit more flexible, because maybe they're at home, logging into a Zoom call and doing 15 minutes on a particular topic is a lot easier than maybe having to travel to the other side of London, or even to London from outside London, to be able to do that kind of work. So that's another way in that the kind of pandemic and working in this online way has created different opportunities in the heritage sector.
Yeah, I suppose just on Anna's question about building on likes in social media to create ongoing interest and interaction, I guess like likes aren't the goal, but I guess it's about creating that engagement online, which was hopefully going to draw people into your other activities, like a lot of the online events we were talking about earlier and the remote volunteering opportunities. So I guess the social media aspect is about building that profile and building kind of the casual relationship that can hopefully turn into a more concrete relationship for at least some of the people who are interacting with you on those platforms.
And there's been a few comments about the chat. I think we're fine to share the chat with you, but I will just check with Gemma, who's kind of running this event for us today. Because I agree, and it would be really nice to have links to everyone's amazing projects that you've been sharing. And there's a question for you, Michael, about being human from Naomi.
Yes. Basically, we are planning a hybrid this year, so yeah, it's going to be all about taking the best of the online and the best of the possible in person and kind of combining those. But we're going to be putting out the call for applications for 2021 on Monday. So all will be revealed there. We're going to say a little bit more about exactly what we want people to do. And we're also doing our own kind of version of this, I suppose. We're doing a webinar on the 18th of March, where again, we're going to be talking a little bit more about formats and what's possible and what we want. So yeah, you can tune into that if you want to learn more. Oh yeah, and there's a link, I think, to the webinar in the chat.
Well, I think that's it for questions, but thank you very much for coming along today. Thank you very much for your kind feedback. And, you know, if you want to know more about the work that Liam and I do and how we might be able to work with you and your organisations in the future, then please do contact us. Even if you just want to kind of have a chat and work out how that might work, that would be great. And thank you very much. And thank you very much, Gemma and Michael, for having us. And thanks to our speakers too.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Yeah.